We've had many unusual characters here over the years, and many special things happen here over the years. We are, after all, the home of the first kindergarten in America. We are the home of the stuffed geese, which was one of our greatest outputs for over 70 years or more, finishing finally in the early 1970s when my cousins, the Rumblers, were the last to noodle geese here. By the way, you'll soon find out that I'm related to almost everybody in Watertown as well. I'm related, by the way, I should mention that I'm related to the entire town of Lebanon, Wisconsin, because I'm related to the Uteks and Tietzes, and they married anything that moved. And I don't mean that in a bad way, although how can it be a good way when you come right down to it? But you cannot throw a stick in Lebanon without hitting a relative of mine. And on good days, when I realize that as I walk down the street I'm related to almost everybody that I pass, I feel very happy. And on bad days, well, I'm very depressed. But tonight, we'll all be as happy as we possibly can be. What I want to do tonight, and as you may have read in the newspapers or what have you, is show a few slides of some of the pictures of early Watertown, kind of give a little rundown on some of our early history, and some of the old homes that we have in town here, and some of the past celebrations and parades that we've had in Watertown. Watertown loves a party. It always has. And that comes mainly from our Germanic heritage, though not entirely. Because when we started out, we were hardly German here. We were English and Irish. We became German. We became Bohemian. We became French and Swedish and what have you. All a large melting pot to make up a rather diversified city and an interesting city to boot. So I think without further ado, we'll start with the slide presentation. To begin with, as everything else, as life itself, it begins with the water. And in Watertown, we have always been rather spoiled at having a rather fine body of water running through our city, namely the Rock River. It was a source of fresh water to the Indians who used this area as a hunting grounds, the Potawatomi and Winnebago Indians. It was a source of food, not only for the Indians, but also for the early settlers here. One of our early settlers, Captain James Rogan, whose house you will see on these slides later on, was fond of telling people that when he first arrived here in 1837, the waters were so teeming with fish that it was no job at all to go down to the water side, reach your hand into the water, and pull back a handful of fish for your evening supper. Another story he was fond of saying was that if you took a wagon across the Rock River, and this was before bridges, of course, that the fish were so strong in parts that the wheels of the wagon would not get wet. They would ride on the back of the fish. And the fish would be flipped up into the back of the wagon, so you had a fresh load of fish for supper as well. That led to the Milwaukee people in the 1830s remarking rather sarcastically about the poor and ridiculous folks in Watertown who could not change their clothing to have it cleaned during the winter and summer of 1837. Because, you see, they ate so much fish that the bones stuck through their bodies and held their clothes tight to their skin. The Rock River was a teeming, raging river at one time with a series of falls and rapids, which is why when Timothy Johnson came here, this area was termed Johnson's Rapids in his honor and also in the honor of the Rock River. This, of course, shows the Rock River from Main Street Bridge looking to the south, showing the first dam built across the Rock River in the Wisconsin side, which is the dam you see there up a ways from the picture there. That was built, the original dam on that site was built in 1837 by George J. Goodhue and his family, who had come up here from Beloit to build the first sawmill, which was up until a few years ago the A to Z Farm Center. That was our first business that had been in business since the 1840s. And they more or less exploited the Rock River for all it was worth. After that, everybody else began to build along the river for water power and for take advantage of the fresh water as well. If you will advance it, please. Now, here you will see one of our prosperous streets in Watertown as it would have looked in the 1830s. This is Clyman Street. A far cry from as it is today, of course, but even as late as when this picture was taken, probably around the 1870s, it was, for the most part, just a path through the woods, as were all the streets and roads here at one time. This was a heavily timbered area which was wonderful for the farmers and for the settlers who came here because they had free and abundant materials available for building their homes. If you'll advance it, please. Our town's founder, Timothy Johnson. To look at him, you would not expect that this was a man who would have braved the wild and gone walking and prospecting on his own for months, in fact years at a time, in search of some eternal El Dorado that he's never seemed to quite achieve. But he was a rather resourceful man. He was a carpenter by trade, and a man certainly born under a wandering star. He had been born in Connecticut in 1792, and as a child, with his father, who, a Revolutionary War veteran, had traveled all over the eastern seaboard. His poor wife had a child, I think, in every state along the eastern seaboard. When he finally left her for what she felt would be the last time in 1835 to come to the Wisconsin Territory, she was not certain if she would ever see him again, because he had been gone for quite some time. When he came here, he arrived in the city, or what is now the city of Racine, in the winter, the early winter, I should say, probably about January of 1836, and there set out on walking expeditions through this area to try and locate a spot that might make a good area for a town. He went down to the southern part of the state, into Illinois, over to the lead mining regions, and finally settled in a little area just above the present site of Jefferson. From there, he built a small shanty, and you might say that he was also the founder of Jefferson, although he's not credited as such, because he was the first person to build a place in that vicinity. From there, he went on a canoe, by canoe, up the Rock River, and he laid claim to Ascalon, the area where Johnson's Creek is today, which also bears his name, and of course Watertown. But this was not a man with a very good business head, because you see, he claimed all of the east and west side of Watertown. He left to go get provisions, came back, found that there were some squatters settled on the eastern side of the Rock River in where Watertown is today, and rather than try to assert his claim rights, he sold the eastern side of Watertown for around $300. Now that's not rather good business if you ask me, because the west side never took off as fast as the east side did. But this is the 1830s, and anything for a dollar. He built himself a lovely little cabin out near Bethesda. There is a marker there next to the boiling spring. And there he and his family settled for about a half a year until they picked up stakes and moved to Johnson's Creek. And they settled there for about a year and a half, and then they came back to their cabin in Watertown. And there they lived, I would assume happily, until he got the wandering spirit again in the mid-1850s and decided to take another excursion to the northern part of Wisconsin, the St. Croix River Valley, up near Sterling in Polk County. And there he remained until 1863. Then he finally came back to Watertown, spent the rest of his days here, and died, well, it's an ignominious death, because you see, he died in what today would be called Mendota State Hospital. So it's a strange come down for the settler of Watertown. But even sadder is what happened to his wife, if you'll advance that once. This is his wife, Lucretia Brownell Johnson. What I mean by a sad life is the fact that she was left to rear the children on her own for much of her married life. She saw her husband sporadically. Well, must have been enough to have about 6 children, let's put it that way. We'll not get down to that level, at least not right away anyway. And when he left in the 1850s, she was near death. And she in fact died in 1857, and without a husband to mourn her passing. So it's only fitting, I think, and very ironic in a way, that on their tombstone up at Oak Hill Cemetery there is an epitaph that reads, "Together at last." It took death to bring them together and to cease his wandering ways. She is responsible for, she is first of all the first white woman to settle in Watertown. She also made the first shroud for the first burial in Watertown, which occurred in January of 1837. A claim jumper by the name of Thomas Bass, who was working for Captain Rogan, was whooping it up with a couple of his friends down in a small cabin about where the senior center is today on South First Street. They were having a good portion of "Oh Be Joyful." One would take a mouthful, the other would take a mouthful, and so on, until the bottle was gone. And then they all more or less decided to fall down and sleep wherever they happened to be. It was a cold night. You know how cold January gets in Watertown, or in Wisconsin, period. And so Thomas Bass began to edge closer to the fire to get warm, and closer to the fire, and closer to the fire, and finally head first into the fire. And the next morning they found him cooked to a turn. So he was buried rather hastily, but not before word spread throughout the small settlements around the area and as far as the Milwaukee settlements, where there was some word about a man who met a mysterious death. And so there was a coroner's inquest, and a lot of people were shaking in their boots. They all were found innocent, but a few people left town rather quickly, and a few others signed the pledge, if you know what I mean. But it so spooked the citizens of Watertown at that time that when the next death was recorded, they took a large ad out in the Madison newspaper that said, "This man died, we didn't have anything to do with it." It was about 1840 that Watertown became known as Watertown. Prior to this time, we were known as Johnson's Rapids, or Johnson's Falls, or Johnson's Post Office. It was in this year that Jefferson County was set off, 1839 actually, was set off and formed as an official county. And at that time, a few people in Watertown who were settlers and residents of Watertown, New York, petitioned the territorial government to name this new town Watertown after Watertown, New York. Watertown, New York is in Jefferson County, New York. Highway 26 runs through its city, and its newspaper is the Watertown Daily Times. Right. Does this sound familiar? Well, Watertown, New York, I believe, has the distinction of being the home of the invention of, I think, the safety pin or the biscuit, one of the two, whereas Watertown, Wisconsin, well, we stuffed a few geese, but that's about it, I'm afraid, you know. Gave a few free textbooks out, but nothing to match with the safety pin or what have you. Coin machine. Well, yes, there is the automatic coin machine, and of course there is our prize-winning basketball team this year as well, so there's many things to be proud of. Next slide, please. Now, the most pressing thing for our early settlers to do was to establish a home. Land was $1.25 an acre, and all you had to do was improve your land, and if you were on the homestead plan, you could get your land free and clear. This is a typical early settler's home. This house is the Schumacher cabin, and it does exist, I'm told, in the town of Ixonia. It's been heavily remodeled. A few years ago, a cabin was discovered out on the west side of Watertown, which has since been dismantled and moved down to Rome, Wisconsin. But you get an idea that there are still cabins hidden in amongst the modern-looking homes of Watertown. But as you can see, it's simply a log cabin with well, not a thatched roof, but of course you have a lot of foliage growing up there. It wasn't until 1847 that we had our first brickyard here, and that's when people began to switch more towards the use of bricks as opposed to wood, because you see, bricks don't burn down as fast as wood does. Next slide, please. Now here you see the business district of downtown Watertown in 1842. That is the intersection of Main and First Streets on the east side of the river. Now, Main Street should never have been Main Street in Watertown. Main Street should have been Western Avenue. It was laid out as such. You note Western Avenue is 2 lanes more or less, a going and a coming lane, and there is a public square at the end of it, which is how all towns were set up at one time. But blame that on John and Luther Cole, who wanted to have a place of business closer to their home area. And so they built a store located where C.D. Beck's restaurant is today, on the north corner of Main and 2nd Streets, and that was where people began to attract their interest, and that's why Main Street took off. Of all the buildings on this painting, the original is at the Octagon House. That large 2-story building in the center still exists in Watertown. That is the oldest building in Watertown. Today, it is the M&M Bar, which it was moved from that site where WTTN Radio is today in 1893, put on wheels and moved down to its present location on the corner of South First and Milwaukee Streets. It was built very hastily. It was called the Exchange Hotel, built in 1840, very rapidly, so that the people of Watertown could celebrate the 4th of July and dance indoors instead of outdoors. Next, please. This is Watertown in 1848. From the bridge looking to the west. The stone building or brick building on the right-hand side is the Rock River House, which is where the Valley Bank, pardon me, is it Valley Bank or M&I now?
Valley.
Well, where that building is today. The Rock River House was owned by Rock River Fisher, Joseph Fisher. He was a man of many talents. He was not only a landlord and a hotel keeper, he was also a dentist, a lawyer, a land dealer, an auctioneer, and I think he dabbled in real estate as well. If you don't make it in one, you make it in another. It was a good stopping spot for immigrants. This was one of our early bridges on Main Street here. The first bridge was a bow-span bridge that sat so low to the water that when you got to the bridge, you had to go down one side and up the other in order to get off of the bridge. East side of Main Street, east side of the Rock River, I should say, was for the most part tamarack swamp. A very unhealthy place to live. A lot of places had to be filled in order to make them even livable. I recall you mentioning that they discovered quicksand when they were building over on Oconomowoc Avenue at one point, so it's still there. It's been well hidden, but it's still there.
On our property.
There was a spot on East Main Street that was a sinkhole with a sign on it that said no bottom. Teams of horses were stationed nearby to pull people out of the sinkhole, and that's how they made their money. Yet the east side took off. The west side, because there was some sort of a property dispute with some of the landowners, never quite took off as well, which is a pity, because the west side, and forgive me, I'm a confirmed West Sider since 1875, but the west side has got much better land when it comes right down to it. The east side has good spots of land, but there is a lot of tamarack swamp and a lot of quicksand here and there. That's why people did get cabin itch, and they got little touches of malaria here and there, and a lot of other little illnesses that you wouldn't have found too readily in other areas of the state. Next, please. The railroad came through in 1856 and promptly killed Watertown. Well, not entirely. Watertown began to be a large city thanks due to the influx of foreign immigrants, Irish, German, and what have you, commencing in the 1840s, and also because, you see, we had the plank road that ran from Milwaukee to Watertown that was finished in 1850, completely finished, I believe, in 1853. It came straight to Watertown, and Watertown then became a hub of traveling activity here. We are really in a favored location, you know, being halfway between the largest city in the state and the state capital, and only about 2 to 3 hours away from Chicago. So we really are in a favored position here. We are in a hollow, so we escape a lot of the bad weather, not entirely. For those of you who lived through the cyclone of the tornado of 1965, and which would rapidly remember that we have not escaped all the bad weather, but a good portion of it we have escaped. This is an 1860 drawing. It's original as a lithograph at the Octagon House showing the Milwaukee Street Railroad trestle. Milwaukee Street Bridge has not been built here. Off to the, more or less the center on the right, is the old yellow mill, or the Empire Mill, which was one of the first mills in town. It later burnt down, and all of the mill workers went to the other side of the river, and they set up the Globe Mill, which was our major mill here for many, many years. When the railroad came through Watertown, the city was so happy that they voted several hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of bonds to help bring the railroad into town. What they didn't count on was the country going into a nationwide depression that would kill off and bankrupt every railroad project in the state of Wisconsin and take with it all the available cash money. So Watertown was held up for about 30 years by a series of outside bondholders who bought up all the bonds the city had issued to bring the railroad through, and held up the city for this $200,000 to $300,000 worth that the bonds were worth. It stymied the public works, it stymied the growth of the city, and it wasn't until 1889 that the city came out from under the crushing debt. But is that such a bad thing in the long run? Because certainly we never got to the size of Milwaukee, but we never got the crime that Milwaukee had. We never got the strange goings-on that Milwaukee has had. And in Watertown, you know everybody, and you can still walk down the street with your head low, not out of respect, but because there might be a coin on the street. So in the long run, did the railroad scandal really do us a damage? That's a debatable question. Next slide, please. Education was foremost on the minds of our early settlers. The Germans took at education very strongly. They established Northwestern College in 1865. This is an 1885 view of part of the campus showing what is known as the old gymnasium, or Café Mule there, which was burnt to the ground when it was struck by lightning in the 1890s. Northwestern College, which is soon to be a thing of the past, I believe after this year it'll be all gone. All we'll have is Luther Prep up there now, was originally founded in a home on North 4th Street. There is a house on North 4th Street that bears a plaque commemorating the founding of the college there. But it was a very important learning educational building. There was also Sacred Heart College, which later became a military academy in Watertown, which is today Maranatha Baptist Bible College. Today, of course, we also have MATC in town, so we are still a college town to a degree. But our first school actually was founded probably in the very late 1830s. And Dolly Piper, daughter of the founder of Pipersville, was the first teacher. And this school was in a building so small that when they taught dancing, the boys had to step outside so the girls could turn around and then they could come back into the building again. Next slide, please. This is our first high school. Well, actually the second, but the first building built exclusively as a high school. The first was on the corner of 5th and Jones, and that was the Casa building, which was torn down in the 1920s. This was Webster School, but it was the first high school from the 1880s until 1890s when the Armory building went up where, oh, what is the place down there? Balustrades, I forget what the name of the place is. The Heritage Inn, thank you. But that was the high school there until 1917 when they built the fine edifice over on South 8th Street. And of course we now have our fine school out on Endeavor Drive. But this was a Webster School, and it was torn down in the 1950s to make way for what is now Trinity St. Luke's School over on Western Avenue. Next, please. And of course, as I said, we are the home of the first kindergarten in America. The building is now on the grounds of the Octagon House. It was originally on the corner of North 2nd and Jones Streets. There is a plaque, commemorative marker, still on the site of the original building. Founded, of course, by Margaretha Meyer-Schurz, wife of the famous German hothead Karl Schurz, who came to Watertown and built a beautiful gingerbread mansion up on North Church Street, which is today the Karlshegel Bed and Breakfast. That house burnt down in 1912. He built it on a rise, a bit of a hill, so that he could look down on the city. And he did look down on the city. He thought that most of the people were idiots, which is a good reason why he was pelted with eggs whenever he used to speak at public functions occasionally. He left Watertown and became quite well known in political circles, made quite a name for himself under Lincoln and Rutherford B. Hayes and U.S. Grant as well in government service. So we have a number of very fine people that have come out of Watertown and made quite a name for themselves. Next, please. I bring this slide up because you see where D&J Pets is and the Checkered Flag Racing News is the site of the first bank in Watertown. That is the Bank of Watertown, founded in that building in 1854 by Daniel Jones. And I am told that in the basement of the pet shop there are still vaults, that the old vaults are still down there. I'd like to get down there. What's nice is I've seen pictures of that street, and the upper part of that building, of those buildings I should say, has not changed materially since they were built in 1854. Next, please. The Germans brought with them certain industries that no one else had thought to bring up in Watertown, one of them being the brewing industry, although in 1846 an Englishman by the name of William Anson did establish an ale brewery here about where the water department is on South 1st Street. But my great-great-grandfather, Jacob Hefner, came here from the Rhineland in 1847 and built that small section of the brewery on the right-hand side where it says brewery. That was known as the Red Brewery. It was the first brick brewery in Watertown, the first lager brewery here in the German sense of the word. And that spawned the entire rest of the works there, which by the time this picture was taken in 1884 was the Hardig und Mantz Brewery. The William Hardig Company was our major brewery here from 1884 until it closed its doors in 1947. You'll note there, that by the way is the site of Tom's United Foods today on Katy Street. You'll see the ice chute coming out from the ice house there, ice cutting, and the ice business, in fact, was a very thriving business in Watertown. We had at least 3 ice companies at one time. There was S.M. Eaton, whose ice house was where the Watertown Bowl 18 is today. And of course, Koloff Brothers and John Knispel were also in the ice business in town here. Underneath this brewery, and all along Katy Street, in fact, are the famous beer tunnels, which are built about 50 feet under the surface, or well, I shouldn't say it, maybe about, is it 50 feet or is it 10 to 20 feet underneath the surface of Katy Street? They are, for the most part, intact. They maintain a mean temperature year-round of 57 degrees, and were ideal and perfect for lagering and aging the beer. We are of only a handful of cities that I'm aware of that still have the beer tunnels in existence yet. And of course, I believe in Milwaukee, they take you on tours through them. Would that we could in this town as well, but it's just a little bit out of our league, I'm afraid. Yes?
Did they ever fill in that tunnel that was underneath where the city hall is now and the police department? There used to be a park there.
Right, Memorial Park.
Facing the river was this tunnel area. Did they ever fill that in, or is that still visible?
I think it's filled in, but I'll tell you something. Memorial Park was not so much a park as it was a boat, because it kept sinking all the time over the years. There was a park across the street from this brewery after a while. Originally, there was a brewery on that site as well. There were 2 breweries facing each other. Where Tom's is today was the Hardig Brewery, and where the City Hall is today was the Fierman Brewery. They tore the Fierman Brewery down in 1914 and built Memorial Park. But they did not fill in the tunnels underneath the brewery very well, so every now and again they'd have to close off sections of the park because the ground kept sinking. People were encouraged to throw trash in there, anything to fill it up.
When I was going to school at St. Henry's, and once in a while we would go down for lunch period, we'd go down and eat our lunch at this little park there. And we'd all through lunch, and the boys that went down there would go in and seek out some of these spots in the tunnels, and they would tell us about it. And if we were brave enough, then the girls would go in there too and look at these things that they found in there.
These days now, if you find a bottle from the Hardig Brewery or one of the other breweries, on the open market, I'll be very candid, they go quite high. But if you have one and you want to give it away, the Octagon House is always looking for those sorts of things. The Octagon House is always looking for them. So am I, for that matter, but I don't get the stuff as free anymore. So, next, please. This is a rather old slide because, of course, since this time, Domino's Pizza has gone belly up. And I think now there is is it a beauty parlor there now, or is it? It is. I forget the name of it. You'll forgive me. I don't keep up with the modern stuff, I'm afraid. Anyway, where the Domino's Pizza is today, or in this picture, I should say, excuse me, was the site of our first drugstore. Built in 1844 by Dr. Edward Johnson. He also has the distinction of having the first soda fountain in the state. It was created by him here in Watertown. For many years, and I hear the name being bandied about now, for many years, though, most of you remember it as being the site of Dare's drugstore. Charlie Dare was the genial proprietor. We're on cable, so I can't say too much. I'll let you folks talk about him, but I won't say anything. Suffice it to say that he was a colorful part of Watertown's rich pageant of citizens. Let's put it that way. Yeah, you said character, not I, okay? Next, please. This slide is out of order, actually, but it bears looking at because you see where that large building is there is where we are sitting today. That is the site of the library, but for many years was the site of the Linden House or the Tremont House or the Union House or the American House, depending upon what year you came here. I point out, we're looking to the east. I pointed out because you notice coming off the side of the building a long black tube-like thing. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
That was something very unique and very special built by the proprietor of the hotel, Joseph Linden, for the comfort of his guests. Can any of you guess what that is?
Isn't it a canopy?
It is a canopy, but why?
Going for the bathroom.
To the comfort house, to the privy. It is a covered walkway to the necessary. So you didn't get your feet wet in this type of weather. You also see how our main street is a dirt road. It was not bricked until 1899. Next, please. Main Street on the north side of the street, looking to the west, and there is wonderful old Kuzel's Hardware. This is 1885. Gosh, I miss Kuzel's. And I miss Poggle's even more next to it. Say, listen, we only have one bakery left in town. One bakery. When you consider we used to have Kozer's and Leopold's and the Quality and the Sally Ann and all of those bake shops in town, we have one bake shop, or East Side Bakery was another one, I forgot about that,
Yeah.
where you could walk in and smell